asylum called human society, where people come out of the womb, go through a programming process called education, where they're told what to do and told what to think and told when they have to be there, when they can leave, when they can eat, when they can speak. And then they go out into the adult world, and a boss or an organization tells them when they have to be there, when they can leave, when they can eat, etc., etc. And then they die. Vast numbers of them in states of poverty and deprivation after they can no longer work. Now, we call this process human life. We have people all over the world dying of hunger in a world of plenty. We have now 1% of the population owning, coming up to 50% of the wealth and growing all the time. We have political parties who in election campaigns, like the present one in the United States, can tell you what you want to hear, depending on the audience, tell you they're going to do this, tell you they're not going to do that, and when they get into office, they do what they said they wouldn't, and they don't do what they said they would. We have a situation where this system of what I call take, make, and throw away, all the time, take more resources, turn it into more things, sell more things, throw away more things, to worship the god of economic growth, is destroying the planet. We have a mechanism, a goal in our economics of increasing economic growth. We must increase economic growth. People must work harder to increase economic growth. Economic growth, or gross domestic product, is merely the amount of money changing hands for goods and services in any year. This means when an oil tanker sinks and destroys pristine coastlines and beaches, that adds to economic growth because of all the money spent and services engaged to try to clean it up. All the negative things in the world that we would like not to happen, most of us anyway, that generate money being spent or handed over, is adding to economic growth, the god of the economic system. When you then look at the fact that we bomb civilian populations, as in Libya, using the excuse of protecting them from violence, you add to that, we have a medical system based on the pharmaceutical cartel, which provides the biggest cause of death in the United States and many other countries, the treatment in its many and various forms. When you put that together, when you think that people have accepted genetically modified food, which is designed and does genetically modify them, when you think that we have a situation where vaccines full of chemical toxic shite is being put into the bodies of young children at a fantastic rate while their immune systems are still forming, and that now we're moving to the point, as in places like California, etc., where this process of putting toxic shite into children is by law mandatory. When you put all of this together and so much more, this world is a madhouse. It is a lunatic asylum. So, first confirmation of sanity. This madhouse sees you as insane. So, thank goodness for that. Because if this human society and those who run it and those who manifest nonsense think I'm sane, then I'm seriously worried because I must be saying something seriously wrong. So first of all, if you're uncovering a madhouse, not only should you expect to be called crazy, you should want to be called crazy so you have confirmation of your sanity and the fact that you're on the right track. So if we then come to conspiracies, the definition of conspiracy, the official definition, is simply two or more people coming together to secretly conspire to bring about a particular end. On that basis, we are drowning in conspiracies. A conspiracy theory, official definition, is simply the suggestion that groups of people come together to secretly manipulate in the background to change society or make things happen that they wish to happen or change. On that basis, we are drowning in conspiracies. And of course, if you look at the background, the term conspiracy theory or theorist came into wider use thanks to a specific campaign by the CIA in the 1960s to discredit those who quite rightly were exposing and questioning the ludicrous official story of the assassination of JFK, of Martin Luther King, of Malcolm X, of Bobby Kennedy, etc., etc. So, you know, when the mainstream, which is the mainstream of the madhouse, whether it's media, politics, corporate entities, banking, whatever it is, when they call you crazy, you know you're on the right track. And, you know, what I would suggest much of the alternative media needs to do is have a look at itself and question whether in so many areas it is a mirror of the mainstream that it so reviles and despises. Because what the mainstream does in all its forms, it takes the official version of everything as its norm. So it takes madness as normal. And it, you know, if you are if you're brought up in a crazy house, a madhouse, and that's all you've known since birth, then crazy is your normal. To you, crazy is normal because it's all you've ever known. When someone comes into that crazy house and says, "Hey, this is crazy," then you see them as crazy because they are talking about something that's outside your normal. So normal, which is kind of used as a label of confirming your sanity, oh, he's normal, is actually merely the perception of something, including the world, that you have developed as a result of your experience. If you're brought up a Muslim, then pointing to Mecca 5 times a day is your normal. If you're brought up a Christian, then going to church on Sunday is your normal. It's only what you have normally experienced, normally heard throughout your life, that constitutes your sense of normal, thus your sense of what is rational, what is true, what is credible. So the alternative media, I would suggest, also needs to look at itself and ask itself what its normal is. Because people like me who are questioning everything and seeing if it stands up to that questioning are as ridiculed by much of the alternative media as we are by the mainstream. Why? Because the mainstream has a normal. And the alternative media, a great chunk of it, also has a normal. Big part of the alternative media in America comes from the Christian perspective. So it's coming from the Christian normal. Other parts of it come from the scientific perspective of normal. So when you're questioning the official view of science, then you're not normal. And so it goes on. And this perception of normal, this attachment to your sense of what is credible based on your own normal, just creates the same prisons, the same perception prisons all over society, while using different labels and using different normals, but the process is exactly the same. I have a normal, therefore you're talking outside of my normal, you must be wrong, you're either mad or dangerous or on the make. And these are the things that people need to look at, both individually and collectively, and see how imprisoned by their version of normal that they are. Because the system works in many ways. It doesn't just have one belief system that it wants people to believe, therefore gotcha. What it wants is any rigid, unyielding belief system that people will not expand out of. Well, you know, I have something I call the default position. I see people all the time in certain situations reverting to default position. So, for instance, after election after election after election after election after election into infinity, of seeing increasingly obviously two candidates who are nothing more than masks on the same face, and quite demonstrably, fighting presidential elections. More and more people, not least of course in the alternative media, have said, what's the point in voting? You're just voting for two people who are controlled by the same force, basically. And then along comes Trump. And suddenly they're back to default position. And that default position is politics can change anything. And so instead of, again, holding that position of the whole political system is rigged, and people come to power and to attention because they're either acceptable to the system or absolutely 100% funded by the system, instead of holding that position of what I would say was reality, they go to default position, which is, no, politics can change it. I think that this guy's different. Now, I remember speaking in Los Angeles. We'll speak there soon again in September when I come to the United States to speak. And I was talking that night. It was in the run-up to the election between McCain and Obama. And so they were saying that, was it McCain and Obama? We went against him in the first one.
Yeah.
It was McCain. It was.
Yeah, McCain and Obama in 2008.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Time just bloody flies. You lose track of time.
It does.
Anyway, I was talking there about the fact that Obama was nothing different to all the rest. He was just another version of it. And I wrote an article which got me a lot of stick at the time, which was Barack Obama, the Emperor's New Clothes, or words to that effect. And I talked to a Democrat talk show host afterwards. And he said to me, I bet you anything you like that Obama's not going to be what you say he is. This guy's different. And I remember saying to him, look, mate, I don't want to take your money, because it was painfully obvious that he was. One simple reason, alone among many others, Obama broke all the records for funding, and the funding of his campaign came from all the usual suspects, the banks and the corporations and what have you. they're not turkeys voting for Christmas. So, but people were saying, because he had this constant mantra of change, I stand for change, I stand for change, I stand for change, that he was different. They bought it. And of course, what he turned out to be was just a continuation of what went before. You know, the list of countries for so-called regime change that appeared in that document by the Project for the New American Century, that the people of the writers and authors of which then came to power with Bush in early 2001, they had a list of countries that they wanted to regime change using multiple theater wars, using their language. And they were Iraq, they were Syria, they were Libya, and so on. But they hadn't done all of them by the time Obama came in. And he's a Democrat, right? He's not Bush. And what has he done? He's continued to do the same, to pick off the same countries on the list. So it's a one-party state masquerading as a so-called free democracy. So when another person comes along, like Trump, I can see the way that people think, no, this guy's different. But let's ask a few things here. First of all, it's no good the alternative media saying that, quite rightly, the whole financial system, banking system, financial system is controlled by a network of the hidden hand and creates money out of nothing on computer screens, and thus basically creates money as a debt to start with, which is the foundation of so many of the human problems and so many of the aspects of human control. But here we have a guy who claims to be a billionaire, who's made his fortune overwhelmingly in property and things like that, which requires enormous amounts of cash flow from the financial system. And if Donald Trump wasn't serving that system and wasn't at least, the very least, acceptable to that system, then they could have crushed him any time they wanted. And yet I see people saying that although this guy's done all this, although he's been connected to some very, very shady people in his life, that somehow he's different.
Now, are you saying are you saying they could have crushed him anytime they liked because they can tap into unlimited resources and crush him? Is that the reason they could? They have the power to do that?
If you control the financial system on the scale that they do, you can crush anybody. You can crush anyone financially. When you control things like the IRS, which this same network does, one of their great ways of destroying people without people realizing that that's what's happening is to send the IRS in. I've met many people over the years, whistleblowers, who've been told that there are consequences and will send the IRS in and do an audit if you don't shut up. So there are many and various ways that Trump could have been crushed by this network that controls finance and taxation and all of it. And so I think it's incredibly, in so many ways, naive to think that this guy has come out of nowhere. I mean, look back to 2008, mate, and it appeared that Obama had come out of nowhere. These people do. And at the very least, Trump is acceptable to them. And some of the things that he said about, like, for instance, killing the families of terrorists, I mean, it's just bizarre, ludicrous. And, you know, I've been researching all this now for 26 years nearly. And, you know, one of my rules is don't judge every step at the moment the step's being taken. And we're not really going to have a really sound fix on what this Trump thing is all about until after the conventions. And we see what comes out after that and which way it goes. Because the political system is totally, totally rigged. And therefore, if someone is coming through the political system and is able to fund it all, then there's a reason behind it.
And that would be, and
it's not just spontaneous.
And that would be an automatic red flag to you, correct?
It would be a red flag to me. And I'll tell you this too. There's another aspect to this that I would suggest. Because of this process over the decades of two blatant masks on the same face being put forward for you to say, which one do you want? They call it choice. People have more and more become disillusioned with the political system and cease to see it as a way to change anything. And if you like, the audience for it, the credibility of it in the eyes of more and more people has been falling and falling and falling. They need to shore up this political system so it stays in place to continue to do what it's done all along, which is put puppets in power. So when you had Obama come in, the selling point of difference was first black president. See, it's different, first black president. Now they're talking about Clinton being the first woman president. Oh, yeah, Hillary, first woman president. You've got Donald Trump. Oh, no, he's an outsider. He's a renegade. He's a rebel. And it seems to me akin to a stage show in a theater that started to lose audience. Not as many people are coming. So you get around a table and you think, how do we get people in? What gimmicks can we use? What methods can we use to entice people in so we fill the seats? And in terms of a focus on the political system, Trump, Clinton, Obama have been godsends when it comes to actually the election campaign and maintaining an interest in it.
And sort of on their part, kind of shaking things up a little bit.
In the background.
Yeah, because in Rome and Greece, it was give them bread and circuses. As long as they're enamored with the show, you can do a little sleight of hand over here and kind of get away with what you want to get away with if you're the elite.
Yeah, well, exactly that. And, you know, what we've had recently with the trouble at the Trump events with people protesting and Trump supporters hurling abuse back, the abuse going both ways and stuff. I put a picture on my website when that happened, and it was a line of puppets with strings attached, and that's what the system wants. It's classic divide and rule. People are being manipulated to hurl abuse at one group of their fellow Americans, and abuse is coming back to their group of Americans. And it's over a complete irrelevance, in my view. An irrelevance because in the end, whoever gets into the White House, what the elite want will happen unless the people stop it. And we're not going to stop it by people fighting with each other and allowing themselves to be divided and ruled into irrelevance. We're going to stop it by all these people who bought these manufactured sides, realizing that's what they've done, and putting their hostility down, putting their weapons down, whatever analogy you want, and coming together and realize that Clinton supporters, Trump supporters, Bernie Sanders supporters are all being manipulated in the same way to conclude that the political system is a way of changing anything. Yeah, well, if you look at Bush and Obama, given Obama's still in at the moment, during the Bush administration, you quite clearly had a group, not even much of it, even in the background, on public display, a lot of it, which were called the neocons or neoconservatives. They were the people behind the Project for the New American Century document, which said we want this to happen, and they came to power with the Bush administration, and what happened? It happened. And it's continuing to happen under Obama.
Referring to 9/11 there.
Yeah, exactly.
Referring to 9/11 on the PNAC document, is that true?
Yeah, I'm referring to 9/11, where they said in this document to justify and get basically public support for all these regime change wars that we won, we need a new Pearl Harbor. And of course, 9 months after they came to power, 1 year to the month after that document was published, they had their new Pearl Harbor, indeed what Bush called the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And as a result of that, they've been able to justify a so-called war on terror, which is actually just a war of terror, and to go into these list of countries that document contained. But the neocons have an equivalent in the Democratic Party, which I call the democons. It includes people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, etc. The Clintons are in there, George Soros, these sort of people. And they are the neocon organizers and handlers of the president in the Democratic Party. The key thing is that if you go to the next level or the next depth of this structure, the neocons and the democons answer to the same master, the same force. Thus, whoever's in power, be it a Democrat president or a Republican president, that force is always in power. And it's that force that's driving the agenda. And that's why, for all the record-breaking number of times that Obama used the word change in the run-up to his first election, he's just been business as usual. And it's that force, that network behind the two parties, same happens in Britain, that people need to focus upon, because they're quite happy with people fighting over whether it will be this puppet or that puppet, because that focus means that people are actually accepting that if they vote for that puppet as opposed to that puppet, the outcome will be different. Once you realize this other network controlling both exists and what its agenda is, suddenly you realize it doesn't matter which one you vote for, because the agenda of the hidden hand is always going to be played out through the president. And so Trump appears to be a renegade of this system, a spanner being thrown in the works. And what this is doing is attracting a lot of people that think, hey, this is a way for a different politics that's outside this control system politics that we've become used to and have become, the normalcy.
The normalcy that you had alluded to earlier. It's their way to break out of their normalcy.
Yes, to a new version of the normal, because there's no way that Trump actually, funnily enough, is a classic politician in the sense that he'll say something for effect, and then at some point he'll say something else. And when you look at some of the statements he's made over the years about his own wealth, his own background, his own business prowess, what he owns, and etc., and people who've done the research into the background have found so much of what he's claimed, even in relation to his own life, his own business background, has turned out to be fundamentally untrue. So if someone's going to do that in those subjects, is he going to tell the truth when he's trying to attract support for political office? Of course not. He's going to say what he thinks will be most effective to attract the kind of constituency that he's looking for. Just as Barack Obama said a lot, just as actually, funnily enough, Hillary Clinton is now, to attract the black vote and the Hispanic vote. But then you look at his 8 years. Has Obama helped the lives of black people? No, not overwhelmingly, because the people who control him couldn't give a damn about black people. They couldn't give a damn that Barack Obama is black. That, to them, is just a vehicle for selling the show, if you like, and keeping people interested. They couldn't give a damn. You know, by their actions shall ye know them. If Barack Obama had spent the last 8 years changing things for the benefit of black people and the black poor and the white poor and the Hispanic poor, etc., etc., and those who have been crushed by the system, if he had been trying to support middle class, the version of middle class you have in America is slightly different to our middle class here, but the middle class of America, whether it's white, black, Hispanic, whatever, then you'd hold your hand up and say, hey, you know, you're doing what you said you'd do. But he hasn't, because this is the process. I mentioned it earlier. During the election campaign, you tell people, particularly the people that whose votes we're going to get you in, you tell them what they want to hear. They vote for you. Then you do what was going to happen all along, which is invariably not what you told people that they wanted to hear. I think it's very sad, I have to say, and sad is the word, that I'm seeing that so much of black America is supporting Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton could not give a damn about those people. But because she's trying to get the Democratic vote, she has to tell them what they want to hear to get their support, to get in office, to then do not as she likes, but as those behind her like. And I would call Hillary Clinton evil, except that I would expect to be sued for defamation of character by evil. I've been tracking this lady and her background now for 25 years. This lady should be in jail and the key thrown mid-Atlantic. Instead, she is running for office and is very possibly going to be the next president of the United States if she can keep at bay all that there is to come out about her. Now, let's think about that. We have someone who is so monumentally pure, undiluted evil for what she's done over decades, who, while the Clintons, including her husband, were so-called fighting the Bushes and the other party, the Republicans, they've always been close friends, business associates, and fellow drug runners in places like the Mena scandal and in Arkansas, when the Clintons were, Bill Clinton was governor, and she was big in the biggest law firm that was so corrupt it's breathtaking. You look at all the background of Clinton, you look at all the stuff with the Benghazi emails, all the lies, and yet she is not in jail, yet. We can always hope. She is not on trial, ditto. She's running for president with a very good chance of victory. Now, you tell me, people, that a system that is so stitched up that a criminal of her global historic magnitude can be running for president instead of running around the exercise yard in a top security prison, and yet, that same system would allow Donald Trump to get this far if he was unacceptable to that system. Not in my reality. That's all I can say. Not in my reality.
Let me just change kind of the tenor of this, but kind of stay on the thing that you were talking about as far as elections. In 2008 and 2012, there was a guy who ran for the presidency named Ron Paul. Now, I had personally met Ron Paul and had a couple of discussions with him. He was operating under the Republican platform, but he was clearly a libertarian who was coming out against the Federal Reserve and all the government indiscretions. As a matter of fact, he had a little placard on his desk in Congress that said, "Don't steal, the government hates competition." So he was always putting the spotlight on government. What's your take on Ron Paul? How do you feel about him and what his ideology was?
Well, you look at Ron Paul, who was coming from more the Republican perspective, and you look at Bernie Sanders, who's coming from more the Democrat perspective. And in many ways, they're similar in this way. They are saying things that are demonstrably true about the banking system, about the inequity of the system, about the corruption of the system. And on that level, round of applause. But of course, there are other things that they say. I mean, Bernie Sanders buys the global warming lie and what have you. And there are things that about both that I would disagree with. But at least they were highlighting, in terms of Bernie Sanders, is highlighting some things that are, like I say, are demonstrably true. And Sanders has stood up and said some good things over the years since the economic crash of 2008 with regard to the banks, with regard to corporations and the extraordinarily small levels of tax, if any, that they pay when the struggling people have to pay taxation or they get prosecuted. But of course, anyone who is saying anything that is exposing the system in any way, and both of them are in their various ways, is not going to be allowed to get anywhere near office. If I had to choose between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, I'd take Bernie Sanders because he's saying far more things that I agree with in terms of the banking system and inequity of wealth distribution than Clinton would ever do, because she represents absolutely everything that is expressing itself through the banks, through the corporations, and so on. So yeah, I applaud both of them for the things that they've said to try to expose the system. But of course, the system doesn't let them get near to office to implement any of it, even the bits I agree with. Well, the way it manifests itself can take different forms. But first of all, my own philosophy on society is the further decisions are made away from the people affected by the decisions, the worse and more irrelevant and more destructive are those decisions. Because people in Washington making decisions about states that they have nothing to do with, have never lived in, making decisions about communities, making decisions on legislation and laws and changes in various things, be it economics or whatever, that fundamentally affect societies they know nothing about, that is insane and is always going to produce an outcome that is not good for most of the people. So I'm a great believer in the devolution of decision making to communities. There is no accident whatsoever that through this period of global control and increasing global control, that running alongside that, not just running alongside that, but fundamental to it, has been the incessant centralization of power. Many, many years ago now, it became so part of life that it was given a name, globalization. And there's a simple equation. The more power you accumulate at the center, the more power you have to accumulate more power quicker. Because the more power you have over the decision making, which is driving this globalization. What we're seeing now with these trade partnerships, whether it's Pacific or Atlantic, is the next stage of that, where this centralization of global power goes on to another level where corporations officially become more powerful than governments and can override and block legislation they don't like, which is passed by so-called servants of the people. So what we're looking at now is the next stage of all this. And what I'm saying here is, in terms of the devolution of power to communities and to, in America's terms, states, but more than states, communities within states, is that the centralization of power on a global level, which is what they want, of course, a world government, a world central bank, world army, world currency, cashless currency, is not by accident, but because without it, they cannot have global control. The idea is to move incessantly, as they are currently, towards a situation where a handful of people is dictating to every community through a structure of world government controlling world institutions across the great spectrum of society. Things like the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization are forerunners, they're stepping stones to these vast agencies of world government dictating health policy, trade policy, all these policies to every community all over the world. That's the idea, and it's not only the idea, it's blatantly unfolding before our eyes. So what they don't want is devolution of power, because some force at the center cannot dictate to everybody globally, because they can't control all the diverse decisions that are being taken by different groups and people all over the world. They've lost control because they've lost control of the decision making. And you know, you look at a subject in, I don't know, Montana, and you look at the same subject or situation in Texas or Florida, or even a community within those states, and what is right in terms of the way that subject or situation is responded to and dealt with and organized will be very different in Montana to what it will be in Florida, because of the situations in the different places. And that would be a nightmare to any centralized cabal, especially a global one. Where do you start trying to keep control of all this diversity? So the idea is it's a one-stop shop. What is imposed upon Florida is imposed upon Montana, even though it's not appropriate for those people in that situation. So diversity of decision-making is absolutely vital, because you can't stop the juggernaut of globalization and centralized global power and control unless you take power the other way. And that's why central government in Washington, in the United States, is constantly trying to override states, constantly trying to take over powers from states and turn it into a federal, centralized, this is how it is for everybody. And of course, there's a wonderful example of that with Common Core. What Common Core is about is a common educational curriculum stroke way of doing things dictated to everybody in the United States. And, you know, I've spent an enormous amount of time in the US over the years, spent months there at a time, a number of times, many times. And as an outsider, the United States, in its true essence, is not a country. It's a grouping of countries, because the states are certainly, when I first started going to the United States, states had their own diversity. They had their own way of doing things. They had their own uniqueness. They had their own, in many ways, their own culture. And the more that I've come to the United States, as an outsider who's not there all the time, I can see the difference when I come in. Not only has it become staggeringly more authoritarian, not least coming through airports and stuff, but I'm seeing the diversity being diluted. And of course, that's what they're doing in Europe. They don't want diversity. Diversity is different. Diversity is celebrating differences. What they are wanting to do is to have one, in the end, global society, global community that's all basically the same, and is run the same, and is structured the same, and is governed the same, and is imposed the same, with a world army and a world police force. And that's what they're doing in Europe, here, with the European Union and the way Europe is being changed. Same process. The diversity is being diluted, and it's all part of a plan. And so, you know, what we need to do is go the other way, giving more and more power to communities to decide their own destiny and their own way of doing things, to celebrate and glory in diversity of culture, diversity of ways of doing things. That's what we are. We're a human race, but we're not supposed to be clones of each other. We're supposed to be unique expressions of humanity, celebrating the diversity of possibility, the diversity of thought, the diversity of ways of doing things. But that is it's the worst nightmare to tyranny. You look at whether it's communism, whether it's fascism, what happens? They want to build societies based on uniformity. And what we need to do is go the other way.
David, you have a tour coming up called the Worldwide Wake Up Tour. Before we talk about that, one of the controversial topics that people pin you to the wall as a lunatic for is the topic of the reptilian race. And I just wanted to read this real quick. You believe that there's a predator race which takes a reptilian form. They're feeding off humanity. They've turned humanity into a slave race, and they demand human sacrifice, which is where Satanism comes from. And they feed off of the human energy, particularly off of the energy of children. Now, I'm sure you teach your audience to question everything. So if someone...
And the energy of fear.
The energy of fear? Okay.
And the energy of fear.
Well, yeah. I'm sure you teach your audience to question everything. So if somebody were to demand objective proof to substantiate your assertion of this, where would he go? I mean, where would you direct him?
Well, let's look at one word: teach. I'm coming to the United States in September. I'm speaking in New York. I'm speaking in Los Angeles, and I'm speaking in San Francisco. And I will speak with breaks, of course, from 10 in the morning till 10 in the evening. And there's 4 sections, all of which fit together, which go deeper and deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole as I go along. It includes the world that we see and how the world that we see is actually controlled, and some of the things and many, many more that we've been talking about. And then I go deeper and deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole. But what I am not doing, and I never do, is teach people anything. I do not require that they believe it. I do not set out to persuade them to believe me if it doesn't make sense. Because the last thing this world needs is someone else standing up and saying to people, this is how it is, and if you believe something else, you're wrong. What I do, and I've done for 26 years, is present information, present evidence to support it, and show how the dots connect, which is what the talks are really about. But in the books, I show, I've got a book here called The Perception Deception. It's the one before the present one, Phantom Self. I mean, look at the size of it, you know. So if people want the background evidence, then they should look at that. But what I'm not trying to do is persuade people of anything. We have to move to a new way of communicating to people, which is not attached to how they receive it. It's no good saying you must think for yourself. I then complain when people say, well, I don't accept what you say. It'd be nice if they looked at the evidence first. Most people don't. But you've got to be at peace with how people receive the information. You have to. And so I'm putting information out, and people take of it what they will. But I would say this, and it kind of goes on from something I've just said. You know, there was a quote from Einstein, which was along the lines of dismissing something without investigating it is the height of ignorance. Words to that effect. And it is. And, you know, I see people in the alternative media, large numbers of them, who claim to be in some way enlightened, who claim to be different from the mainstream. And I see them dismiss things that I say by reflex action just because they're different to their current sense of normal. Come back to how we started. And that's how the mainstream work. You know, dismiss things by all means. But look at the evidence that's been put together first, for goodness sake, if not least to have respect for yourself. But the way people, I mean, you know, you look at the things through history where someone's come out and said something and it's been dismissed. They've been crazy, they've been mad, they've been dangerous. And then with the hindsight of the passage of what we call time,